name's Leah Shore. I'm a filmmaker, an artist, and I'm here to talk about the Hubleys, some of the most amazing, underrated filmmakers and animators that I have ever heard of. And who better to interview than their kids?
I'm Georgia. I'm the youngest.
I'm Emily Hubley.
I'm Ray Hubley.
And I'm Mark Hubley.
We're here to talk about your fabulous parents. And let's start talking about John and his background.
Well, John was inspired to be an artist by his grandfather, and he went to LA and went to art school where he was scouted by the Disney company, and he became an art director there. He worked on Pinocchio and Bambi and Snow White. He worked on Fantasia, and that was a little more symbolic and abstract than the other Disney films.
Yes, Fantasia was different, A, with the music, and B, I know one thing about our dad was he wanted films to be about people and not necessarily Mickey Mouse and dancing hippos. So you have this sort of dichotomy of both in Fantasia. But I think that was kind of eye-opening for him as well as maybe some of the other artists there. We started to realize that there were all kinds of things you could do with animation that hadn't been done.
And he was working there when there was a big strike against Disney. A lot of people left after that or were not invited back. And he went on to be a founder and director at UPA. And he worked there on the Mr. Magoo cartoons and some of the Fox and the Crow cartoons.
And do you want to tell us what UPA was?
UPA, well, as Emily said a little bit ago, when he left Disney, I could be wrong, but I think he took some people from Disney with him and they formed this company.
And the UPA films had a kind of a distinctive look as well. That was really distinctive from Disney, what had been done in the visual style, the looser improvisational kind of feel of Jim Backus as Mr. Magoo and all the mumbling.
John, and I'm sure the other artists too, are interested in a lot of fine art. So there's a lot of Picasso kind of imagery and Cubist imagery. And I know John also designed a bunch of jazz album covers.
There was a lot of room to try things, new kinds of things that weren't just dictated by making entertainment. And then the blacklist happened and he was invited to leave UPA and he left there and founded a commercial studio where he could work without putting his name on his work and made a lot of commercials and also worked on a documentary which Faith was working on, and they became friends. Faith grew up in New York, but she ultimately got out to Hollywood as a young woman. She wanted to work in the industry. She started out as a messenger, and then she began to work. She knew how to read music. She got to work as an editor, and she sort of worked her way up in the business. But they knew each other for a long time before they were romantically involved.
They got married in New York, I think, right?
Yeah, I think they got married a couple of years ago, actually.
Yeah.
I know that they pledged to each other that, yes, we will make commercial things, but we also have to make a personal film a year.
That was a model that they kind of embraced, and somehow they roped in the idea that, at least this is part of the family legend, that they would also always have dinner at home with their children. And
at least once a week.
At least a dinner.
And then spend the entire dinner fighting.
Right. With each other about work.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of enforced things like that in our family that was also somehow connected to the work regimen of their relationship. And they used to have a thing of go around the table and tell your day. And it was like a pitch meeting or something.
It's like the script clerk, yeah.
Let's talk about Tender Game.
The evening breeze caress the trees tenderly.
The film has always struck me as like it's a love letter between the two of them. The figures, the male and the female characters, they look like mom and dad to me. The dancing together that they do. And it also always feels, when I watch that film, it feels like it's the perfect length. It's like a poem. It's just rises and completes itself.
But I know that Faith also said of that, she goes, they weren't depictions of their outer selves, but they were the depictions of their inner selves.
It's sung by Ella Fitzgerald, and it's beautifully animated. And to me, it looks like influenced by Picasso, Matisse, Dadaism.
Their deep interest in fine art and painting definitely influenced their filmmaking, and it's bringing animation into an art form beyond cartoons. And especially with the music, there's a lot of film without dialogue.
You had this kind of feeling of theater, of how characters would move across the stage, and little things that they could do that would be interesting that maybe didn't have to do with the dialogue.
I would love to talk about the technique that's being used in this film.
It's multiple exposures. We have some of these exposure sheets where they're going through the camera at 10%, 25%, 50%, that there's different levels of exposure on the same piece of film. So that it's the same piece of art, but you're traveling across it at different speeds. And that's what gives it that dimensionality where you see like 5 versions of the same thing. And that was something that John developed with the camera guy, Jack Buer, that he worked with. But it was also economically savvy. And I think that some of the making of those backgrounds was to have distinct light and dark, so that when they did go over each other in those instances, that it's almost like you're seeing through them to the next one, to the next one, to the next one.
I have an anecdotal memory of whenever seeing Dad working. He's bending over one of those giant tables, drawing a giant background, painting a background. He looks like a Renaissance painter on a scaffolding up on a ceiling somewhere.
Can you tell me how they worked together, John and Faith? Like, who did what? Who directed? I believe it was John most of the time.
Well, the thing that's funny with the credits is, they really worked together. And then when it came time to put the names on the film, that was always just a thunderstorm, because you had to label who was doing what.
That's probably typical in filmmaking already, and even making in music, where you have the credit and it says produced by so and so, but the collaboration is always much more involved,
organic.
Yeah.
As I look back on it, Faith did not always get the credit that she deserved for the partnership, because it was at a time when it was John Hubley and his wife making movies, was kind of a lot of the public perception. And it was something I think they both pushed back against. But as I look at it, I see that Faith editing together these improvised dialogue tracks and constructing things that almost, it approaches being something like a writer for the films.
Want to see me make water? Real water? Get me an oxygen one and get me 2 hydrogen ones. These kinds are these kinds.
Their view of the art form also was also really propelled by the idea that animation was a truly international language.
I think too is as far as modern art in that time, or 20th century art, was often tied to politics, and I think that kind of seeped into their filmmaking as well.
Suppose a piece of Venus get knocked off, and they think it's one of them things coming over from over there, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Accident.
No, that's why they're preventing the accident from happening. You're proving my point by telling me that.
No.
I think that their relationship cultivated their politics, and it became increasingly important in their work. And the passion that they had for politics or for issues was something that sometimes got them in trouble or created barriers for them in some ways, but it really fueled their work and fueled their pushing of the boundaries of the art form as well. And there's that moment in The Hole when the piece of equipment falls from the crane.
Maybe I stayed up too late. Maybe I got stoned or something. That's the only reason I black out.
And they rush up to see what they see, and what they see is a landscape of nuclear annihilation.
I think it was made right around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, I remember being terrified that the bomb was coming.
I also adore how it's just this plain conversation between two
fantastic
production
improvisation
workers, Dizzy Gillespie.
If I should die now, my wife is going to be rich, right? Yes, I'm insured. I got a whole lot of insurance.
Was this film written beforehand or completely improvised?
Oh, that has to have been improvised. I mean, I'm sure they had an idea of that Dizzy Gillespie and that other actor, obviously George Matthews coming from two different worlds, and it's a fantastic improvisation.
I think that's something that's really powerful about it even today is those two characters coming from completely different worlds.
Right.
What kind of dancing do you do?
I do regular ballroom dancing.
Conversing and having these, kind of philosophical conversations.
And the improvisational spirit. I think the jazz musicians are the people who introduced that principle, that style, to John and Faith's work.
Let's talk about jazz. There's a lot to talk about. Ella Fitzgerald, Dizzy Gillespie. Can we talk about what drew them to jazz?
Well, I think they started using jazz in the commercials first, is my recollection. And these guys were family members. I mean, I can remember them having parties, and I'd sneak out of my bedroom and go climb into Dizzy's lap, and he was just so big and soft, and they were around all the time. I remember on Ray's birthday once, we didn't hear the doorbell ring. We heard the happy birthday on a trumpet.
Right.
And Dizzy was in the hallway, standing on his head, playing happy birthday. He's a great.
That's amazing.
These guys were just so awesome to have them in our lives. And I would say we took it for granted, but they were part of the fabric of our growing up.
I would also say that the freedom in which jazz musicians play jazz and play music, and of what Mark's describing socially in a human way, was something that really kind of set a model.
Yeah, I think they really wanted to arrive at the natural music of human expression, again, that it's not regimented, but that it has a natural flow and beauty of its own that you don't want to get in the way of.
And it applied to the films that we as kids did, where they just recorded us and then edited together a storyline or a script to work with.
I think they were like some of the first filmmakers to actually use real voices of children instead of actors, which I feel gave a realness to the film.
You be quiet, Marky.
Mark, what do you remember of recording Moonbird? Mark was what? You were 6.
I was 6. Yeah,
and I was 3, so I have a lot fewer memories.
Well, I think the real dynamic of the film is that I was aware that we were making a film, and I kind of knew the bones of the story, and Ray was just reacting in the moment. He was just playing in the studio.
Did John act it out with you physically?
Oh, he was in there with us, in with us.
I remember him being the bird at different times.
I wonder, when you watch it, do you see your dad?
In the movements of the bird, the actual bird in Moonbird, I've seen a son of our dad. That was like him.
That was his voice. And
the movements, the thing that the bird does with his hand like this was something my father did.
Oh, yeah.
Are you sad? Yeah, no more candy, bird.
Talk about Faith's career when she was on her own, making her own films, because she was quite prolific after John had unexpectedly passed away.
When you talked about that famous pledge of making an animated film every year, Faith was a turbine engine, and she very disciplined, and she set up her days in certain ways and her years. And after John passed, I think her future in animation was very uncertain, and she fought her way through what was still at that time very male-dominated field. And she had a mantra. She said, I'm making 1 film a year. And that's how she managed to make how many films? I mean, it must have been 15 films on her own. like clockwork every year.
I was very much inspired and encouraged and helped by Faith as she was making her films, and I was getting to work on her films. And there was a model for how you could create your own way. And so I ended up going to this field with the idea that I would find my own voice at it. So I think that all of us were encouraged to try things out and apply our individuality to it.
Well, yes, I'm playing a group with my husband, Ira Kaplan, and I would say it is not a coincidence that the two of us ended up working together. And I think it's funny because I think when we started out, I probably was a little wary of working together, having grown up, even though obviously what John and Faith did was incredible. But now, many, many years later, it seems clear to me the influence of John and Faith. And also as artists, their devotion to their work and how their independence is key.
It's great that maybe these films will find out life with new people and they'll bring something to the table maybe that people haven't thought about or will excite people.
And I think it's exciting for the work to be discovered and hopefully cherished. It's very gratifying to me that this can happen now.
These films for years and years have not been seen by many, many people, and they're beautiful films. They're unusual films, and they're two people who are artists who are so unique, and I think these films should be seen.